If someone had told me a year ago that my life would be irrevocably altered by a man who used a wrench the way a barbarian used a club, I would have politely returned my book to the shelf and walked away. My world was quiet. It was a universe curated by the Dewey Decimal System, a place where the loudest sound was the whisper of turning pages or the gentle sigh of the ancient heating system. I was an archivist, a guardian of forgotten stories, and my own life was a carefully cataloged collection of routines. Coffee at 7, work at 8:30, lunch, a sandwich eaten at my desk at precisely 12:15. I found comfort in the predictability, a strange sort of safety in the silence. Then came Julian. He was the new head of building maintenance, and he was the antithesis of everything I held dear. He was loud. His boots echoed on the marble floors like a drumbeat of impending doom. His voice, a low rumble that could carry through 3 sections of nonfiction, seemed to physically disrupt the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. He was a disturbance in the force of my meticulously ordered existence. From my perch in the archives, a glass-walled office that overlooked the main reading room, I watched him. It was not a conscious choice at first. He was simply impossible to ignore. A large man, built not with the sculpted precision of a gym, but with the solid, functional strength of someone who lifted heavy things for a living. Broad shoulders strained the fabric of his simple work shirts, and his arms, dusted with dark hair, were a roadmap of veins and sinew. He moved with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, taking up space as if he owned it, as if the very air was his to command. I decided, quite firmly, that I disliked him. He was a disruption, a noisy, brutish element in my sanctuary of silence. My colleagues, mostly soft-spoken women of a certain age, were charmed. They would bring him cookies. They would laugh at his dry, infrequent jokes. I would simply lower my head, focusing on the brittle pages of a 19th-century ledger, and pretend he did not exist. This worked for a time. Our paths rarely crossed. He was in the bowels of the building, wrestling with pipes and wires. I was in the climate-controlled silence of the past. We were 2 different species inhabiting the same ecosystem, operating on different schedules, speaking different languages. Mine was the language of footnotes and acid-free paper. His was the language of clanging metal and muttered curses. The distance was comfortable. It was necessary. I could observe him from my safe, hermetically sealed world, a specimen of loud masculinity I found both irritating and, if I was being honest with myself in the dead of night, strangely compelling. The way he'd push his dark, unruly hair off his forehead with the back of a greasy hand. The sheer physical presence of him, a solid, unmovable fact in a world of fragile paper and fading ink. These were just observations, data points, nothing more. And so the weeks turned into months, a quiet rhythm of avoidance and distant observation, until the blizzard. It was Christmas Eve, and the sky had been the color of a lead pipe all day. The forecast had gone from a gentle dusting to a full-blown winter storm warning in a matter of hours. The library director, a woman with a perpetual air of harried panic, announced we would be closing at noon. A collective sigh of relief went through the staff. Visions of eggnog and crackling fires danced in their heads. My own plans were less festive. A frozen dinner, a classic film, the company of my cat, Orwell. It was the same as any other night, just with the added pressure of mandated cheer. I was in the rare books archive, doing a final check of the humidity levels when I heard it. A sound like a gunshot, followed by the high-pitched scream of water spraying under immense pressure. I rounded a shelf of Civil War diaries to find a geyser erupting from a copper pipe near the ceiling, raining down a torrent of rusty water onto a cart of priceless manuscripts. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my carefully constructed calm. My heart became a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. I scrambled, moving the cart, covering what I could, my mind racing. The director appeared, her face pale. And then, behind her, he appeared, Julian. He took one look at the situation, and the lazy confidence I so disliked was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. He was already shrugging out of his jacket, his voice cutting through the hiss of the water. "Shut off the main. He barked at a stunned-looking security guard. Then his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue I had never been close enough to notice, landed on me. "You, archivist, you have to stay." It was not a request. The director wrung her hands. "Leo, I am so sorry, but he's right. Someone has to be here to monitor the collection while he works. We can't leave the vault open." And just like that, my quiet, solitary Christmas Eve was canceled. I was to be trapped in the library, with the storm, with the damaged books, and with him. The staff evacuated in a flurry of worried glances and sympathetic murmurs. The great front doors were locked. The emergency lights kicked on, casting the vast, empty halls in an eerie, humming glow. The blizzard, once a distant threat, was now a reality, throwing sheets of white against the tall, arched windows. It was just the two of us. The silence that fell was different. It was not the peaceful, academic silence I cherished. It was a heavy, loaded silence, thick with the sound of the wind, the drip of water, and the beat of my own anxious heart. He worked with a grim efficiency. The main valve was shut off, the geyser reduced to a pathetic trickle. He laid out his tools on a heavy canvas cloth, the metal pieces gleaming under the emergency lights. He was a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. My job was to stand by, to offer what little assistance I could, which mostly involved handing him things to try and stay out of his way. Forced proximity. It was a novelist's cheap trick, and I was living it. Up close, he was different. The arrogance I had perceived from a distance was just an economy of motion, a lack of wasted energy. The noise he made wasn't careless. It was the inevitable result of a powerful force acting upon the physical world. I started to notice the details. The fine web of lines around his eyes, etched there by years of squinting at intricate problems in dim light. A small, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a relic of some forgotten story. The dark stubble that shadowed his jaw, a sign that he, too, had expected to be home by now. He was working on the burst pipe, his body contorted at an awkward angle on the ladder. His shirt had ridden up slightly in the back, exposing a narrow band of skin above the waistband of his jeans. I found myself staring at the subtle curve of his spine, the way the muscles shifted under his skin as he worked. I quickly looked away, my face hot, a sudden and unwelcome jolt of awareness running through me. This was Julian, the loud maintenance man. The disruption. What was I doing? "Need the big wrench," he grunted, not looking down. His voice, stripped of its usual booming quality, was rough with effort. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, cold and solid in my hands. I held it up to him. He reached down, his focus still on the ceiling, and his hand closed over mine to take it. It was only for a second. A brief, accidental collision of flesh and bone. But it was like a live wire. His hand was rough, calloused, the skin a landscape of old nicks and scars. And it was warm, an impossible, radiating heat that shot up my arm and spread through my chest like a flash fire. My breath hitched. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned, the wrench clattering slightly as he took its full weight. He didn't seem to notice. Or, if he did, he gave no sign. But I noticed. My skin still tingled where he had touched me. The ghost of his grip was a brand on my palm. The air in the room had changed, charged with a new and terrifying electricity. My heart was doing that frantic bird thing again. Only this time, it wasn't from panic over the books. It was something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. An hour later, the pipe was patched. A temporary fix, but a solid one. The dripping had stopped. Julian climbed down from the ladder, wiping a smear of grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "Well," he said, his voice quiet. "That's that." Then, as if on cue, the emergency lights flickered. They buzzed, dimmed, and died, plunging us into an absolute, profound darkness. The hum of the generator cut out. The only sound was the howling of the wind outside, a lonely, mournful sound. "Great," Julian muttered in the dark. "Just great." My own panic was a cold knot in my stomach. But then something else kicked in. This was my territory. I knew this building's secrets. The main generator must have failed, I said, my voice surprisingly steady in the oppressive blackness. But there's a place. An old reading room in the original wing. It's on a separate circuit. It has an electric fireplace. I could feel his surprise in the dark, a subtle shift in the air. The power dynamic had just tilted. He was the one who could fix the pipes, but I was the one who knew the map. "Lead the way, archivist," he said, and there was a new note in his voice. Not mocking, maybe respect. I navigated us through the pitch-black maze of shelves, my memory of the library's layout as ingrained as the lines on my own hand. I could feel him behind me, his presence a warm weight in the cold air. At one point, my foot caught on a misplaced stool, and I stumbled. A hand shot out and gripped my arm, steadying me. His hand. The touch was firm, impersonal, and gone as quickly as it came. But the heat was there again. The jolt. My skin burned. The reading room was just as I remembered. Small, dusty, filled with forgotten furniture, shrouded in white cloths, like ghosts in mourning. I found the switch for the fireplace. A click, and the room was filled with a soft, orange glow from the fake logs. It was a cheesy, unconvincing flame, but it was light, and it was a promise of warmth. The temperature in the library was already plummeting. The stone walls seemed to leach the heat from the air. "I'll get some blankets," I said, my teeth starting to chatter. From the lost and found, when I returned with a stack of musty-smelling wool blankets, he had dragged two of the ghostly armchairs close to the electric fire. He had taken off his tool belt, placing it carefully on the floor. Without it, he looked less like a maintenance man and more like just a man. A tired man, trapped in a blizzard on Christmas Eve. I handed him a blanket. Our fingers brushed. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. My eyes met his for a fraction of a second in the flickering orange light. His gaze was intense, unreadable. We sat in silence for a long time, wrapped in our separate cocoons of wool, the only sound the faint hum of the heater and the roar of the wind. The silence was no longer heavy. It was expectant, a held breath. "I hate Christmas," he said suddenly, his voice low. The words dropped into the quiet room like stones into a still pond. I looked at him, surprised by the raw honesty in his tone. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring into the fake flames, his expression unguarded for the first time. "It's a holiday for families. For people who have people," he shrugged, a small, tight movement of his broad shoulders. "My folks passed a few years back. No brothers or sisters. It's just a day, a really loud, lonely day, and there it was. A crack in the facade. The confident, arrogant man I thought I knew was just a shell. Inside was someone who felt the same crushing weight of solitude that I often did. I understand. I heard myself say, the words soft. I've never been very good at the required merriment. I prefer the quiet." He turned his head then, and his blue eyes were searching. "Yeah, but is it a choice? The quiet? Or is it just what's left after you get tired of trying?" The question hit me like a physical blow. It was too perceptive, too close to the bone. "A bit of both, I suppose," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Books are safer. They have predictable endings. People are messy. Tell me about it," he said, with a short, humorless laugh. He looked back at the fire. "You know, I see you. In your glass box. Always watching everything. Figured you had me pegged as some loudmouthed ape who bangs on pipes." My face flushed with shame. I may have misjudged you," I stammered. "Yeah, well," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I figured you for a stuck-up bookworm who thought he was better than everyone else." I couldn't help but smile back. "I may have misjudged you, too." The admission hung in the air between us, clearing away the last of the animosity, leaving something new and fragile in its place. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. His childhood on a farm, my obsession with historical maps, the ridiculous patrons we both had to deal with, the loneliness. We talked a lot about the loneliness. He wasn't a brute. He was thoughtful and funny in a dry, understated way. He was intelligent and surprisingly sensitive. And I wasn't just a bookworm. I was someone who could talk to him, who could make him laugh, whose own quiet world seemed to expand in his presence. At some point, the cold became too much. The single electric heater was fighting a losing battle. Without a word, we pushed the two armchairs together and draped another blanket over both of us, huddling for shared warmth. He was so close, I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could smell the faint, clean scent of soap mixed with something uniquely him, something like metal and winter air. My heart was a steady, heavy drum against my ribs. I was acutely aware of his thigh pressed against mine, of his arm brushing my own. Every point of contact was a spark on my nerve endings. My entire body was awake, alive, in a way it had not been for a very long time. Or maybe ever. His head was tilted back against the chair, his eyes closed. I watched the way the firelight played over the sharp angles of his face, the shadow of his eyelashes on his cheek. He looked younger, more vulnerable, in repose. My gaze drifted upward, and that's when I saw it. Hanging from a water-stained ceiling tile directly above us was a sad, dusty piece of plastic mistletoe, probably left over from a staff party years ago. One of its plastic berries was missing. I let out a small, involuntary laugh. His eyes opened. What? I just pointed. He followed my finger, and his eyes landed on the pathetic sprig of plastic. A slow smile spread across his face. You have got to be kidding me. The air shifted again. The comfortable warmth became a simmering heat. The silence was no longer companionable. It was electric with unspoken things. He turned his head fully toward me. We were so close. His smile faded, replaced by that same raw, questioning look I had seen earlier. His blue eyes searched mine in the dim light, and I felt as if he could see every lonely, hopeful, terrified corner of my soul. Leo, he said, his voice a low murmur. My name on his lips was an unfamiliar sound, a revelation. He didn't move. He just watched me, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to break the spell. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, caught in the intensity of his gaze. My entire world had shrunk to the few inches between our faces. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he began to lean in. My breath caught in my throat. This is happening. This is actually happening. His lips touched mine. It was not a passionate, demanding kiss. It was soft, questioning, incredibly gentle. His lips were chapped from the cold, but they were warm, and they tasted faintly of the coffee we had shared hours earlier. It was a kiss of shared solitude, of unexpected connection in the middle of a storm. I felt a lifetime of carefully constructed walls crumble into dust. I leaned into him, my hand coming up to rest on the rough fabric of his shirt, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. He deepened the kiss slightly, a soft sigh escaping his lips. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his callous thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was grounding. It was real. We broke apart slowly, our foreheads resting against each other. Neither of us spoke. There were no words. There was only the sound of the wind, the hum of the heater, and the frantic, wonderful, terrifying beat of our two hearts, finally in sync. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Eventually, exhaustion won. We fell asleep huddled together in the chairs, my head resting on his shoulder, his arms securely around me. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I did not feel alone. I woke to the unfamiliar weight of a head on my shoulder and the bright, unforgiving light of morning. The storm had passed. Sunlight, sharp and brilliant, streamed through the dusty windows, reflecting off the pristine snow that blanketed the world outside. The magic was gone. The intimate, fire-lit bubble we had created had been burst by the harsh light of day. Julian was still asleep. His face, so close to mine, was peaceful. I could see the individual dark lashes resting against his cheek, the slight parting of his lips. A wave of something warm and terrifyingly potent washed over me. Tenderness. Then his eyes fluttered open. They focused on me, and for a moment, I saw the same warmth, the same connection from the night before. Then he seemed to remember where we were, who we were. He sat up abruptly, pulling away from me. The loss of his warmth was immediate and shocking. Morning, he said, his voice thick with sleep and something else. Distance. He stood up, stretching his arms over his head, deliberately not looking at me. Looks like the storm's over. Power's probably still out, but the road should be clear enough soon. He was all business. The man who had confessed his loneliness to me, who had kissed me with such hesitant tenderness, was gone. In his place was Julian, the head of maintenance. My heart, which had felt so full and warm just moments before, began to shrink, turning into a small, cold stone in my chest. Anxiety, a familiar and unwelcome companion, wrapped its icy fingers around my throat. I should check the main generator, he said, already gathering his tools. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I watched him, my own words trapped in my throat. What could I say? Thank you for the life-altering kiss. Sorry for the inconvenience. I'll clean up here, I managed to say, my voice sounding small and foreign in the bright, silent room. He just nodded, and then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving me alone with the rumpled blankets and the ghost of his warmth. It was a mistake. The thought screamed in my head. A fluke, a moment of shared vulnerability brought on by a blizzard and a holiday. It meant nothing. I felt a wave of humiliation so intense it made me physically nauseous. I had let him in. I had let myself feel something, and the second the sun came up, he had run. An hour later, the main lights flickered on. The comforting hum of the building's systems returned. Julian came back to the reading room. He had his jacket on, his keys in his hand. We're back online, he said, his tone clipped and professional. Security is at the front door. They can let you out. He still wouldn't look at me directly. His eyes were fixed on a point just over my shoulder. I've got to go. Need to check on my apartment. Pipes. It was a flimsy excuse, and we both knew it. Okay, I said, my voice flat. I wrapped my own coldness around me like a shield. If he could pretend it didn't happen, so could I. Thanks for fixing the pipe. It's my job, he said. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to turn to say something, anything. But he didn't. He just walked out, and I was left alone in the silent library on Christmas morning. The silence I had once cherished now felt like a punishment. It was an absence, a void where his voice, his presence, had been. I spent Christmas Day and the day after in my apartment. The library was closed for the holiday. The solitude was suffocating. Every tick of the clock was a countdown to nothing. I replayed every moment of that night over and over in my head. The accidental touch, the shared blankets, his confession, the kiss under that stupid plastic mistletoe. Had I imagined the tenderness, the connection? His morning after retreat was a brutal negation of everything I thought we had shared. My stomach was a pit of writhing snakes. My old friend, anxiety, had returned with a vengeance, whispering its poison in my ear. You were a fool. You misread everything. He was just lonely and cold. You were a convenience. By the time the library reopened, I had managed to build my walls back up thicker and higher than before. The plan was simple, avoidance. I would be professional, distant. I would bury myself in my work and pretend that Christmas Eve had never happened. It was the only way to protect what was left of my stupid, hopeful heart. I walked into the library that morning feeling like a soldier heading into battle. My armor was a starched shirt and a carefully neutral expression. I made it to my glass office without seeing him. A small victory. I tried to lose myself in cataloging a new acquisition, but my focus was shattered. Every time the door to the reading room opened, my head would snap up. Every distant clang of metal made my stomach clench. He was a ghost haunting the periphery of my vision, a presence I felt even when I couldn't see him. Around mid-afternoon, he found me. I was in the deep stacks of the archive, the narrow aisles a comforting, book-lined womb. I heard the footsteps, and my blood ran cold. I didn't turn around. I just stared intently at the spine of a book, pretending to be engrossed. Leo, his voice was quiet right behind me. I flinched. Slowly, I turned to face him. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the usual confident set of his shoulders was gone. He looked as wrecked as I felt. He was holding a small, clumsily wrapped package in his hands. I said, my voice coming out as a cool, distant croak. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a gesture of uncertainty so unlike him it was jarring. Look, he started, his gaze fixed on the package in his hands. I, I'm an idiot. I remained silent, my heart hammering against my ribs. He finally looked up, and his blue eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading vulnerability. The other morning, I panicked, he said, the words coming out in a rush. I'm not good at this. At feelings. I'm good with things I can take apart and put back together. Things that have instructions. People, you were right. They're messy. He took a step closer, and I could smell the cold winter air on his jacket. I woke up, and it was all so real. And it scared the hell out of me. So I did what I always do. I ran. He held out the package. This is a terrible apology. My hand was shaking as I took it. The paper was cheap, the tape crooked. I carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a book. A beautiful, leather-bound first edition of a collection of poems by Cavify. I had mentioned, in our long night of conversation, that he was my favorite poet. He had remembered. A small, insignificant detail from hours of talk. He had remembered. I looked up at him, my throat thick with unshed tears. It wasn't a mistake, Leo, he said, his voice raw. Not for me. It was the least mistaken thing I've done in a very long time. I was just too scared to admit it. The walls I had so carefully rebuilt crumbled to dust, washed away by the tide of his confession. I was scared too. I whispered. A look of profound relief washed over his face. He took another step, closing the small distance between us in the narrow aisle. He reached out, not to kiss me, but to take my hand. His fingers laced through mine, his calloused palm warm and solid against my own. The touch was no longer a shocking jolt. It was an anchor. Can I, he started, then cleared his throat. Can I take you to dinner? Not out. At my place. I want to cook for you. The gesture was so simple, so domestic, so much more meaningful than a fancy restaurant. It was an invitation into his life. I'd like that, I said, a real smile finally breaking through. He squeezed my hand, his own smile transforming his tired face, making him look years younger. Good, he said. That's good. He didn't let go of my hand. We just stood there for a moment in the quiet, dusty aisle, surrounded by the stories of the past, at the beginning of our own. Life, I discovered, is not a book. It doesn't follow a neat, predictable narrative. There are plot twists you never see coming. Julian was my plot twist. That first dinner at his apartment was awkward and wonderful. He burned the garlic bread and overcooked the pasta, and we laughed until our sides hurt. His apartment was Spartan and tidy, a stark contrast to my own cluttered, book-filled space. But it was warm and it was real. Slowly, tentatively, we started to build something new. We learned each other's rhythms, the quiet language of a shared glance, the comfortable weight of a hand on the small of the back. His world of noise and my world of silence began to overlap. I found a strange comfort in the sound of him tinkering with a broken appliance in the other room. He started reading in bed at night. The soft glow of his lamp a new and welcome addition to the darkness. His tool belt now hangs on a hook by my front door, next to my tweed jacket. His heavy boots sit beside my worn leather loafers. These small, domestic invasions are not disruptions. They are proof. Proof that my carefully curated solitude was never safety. It was a cage. Now, in the mornings, the first sound is not my alarm clock, but the rumble of the coffee maker. Julian is always up first. He makes the coffee, and I pour the cups. We sit at my small kitchen table, the early morning light filtering in, and we talk. Or sometimes we don't. Sometimes we just sit in a comfortable, easy silence that is a universe away from the lonely silence of my past. It's a silence filled not with absence, but with presence. His presence. I look at him now, across the table, his hair a mess from sleep, a smudge of newsprint on his nose from the paper he's reading. And I think about the man I thought he was. The loud, arrogant brute who disrupted my peace. He did disrupt it. He shattered it. And from the pieces, he helped me build something infinitely better. He showed me that a heart is not an archive to be kept under lock and key, climate-controlled, and protected from the world. It's meant to be handled. It's meant to be read. It's meant to be shared. I didn't come to the library looking for love. I came looking for quiet. But love found me anyway, in the middle of a blizzard, in the dark, under a forgotten, dusty piece of plastic mistletoe. It turned out the greatest story I would ever discover wasn't hidden on a shelf. It was standing on a ladder, complaining about a broken pipe. And my quiet, predictable life became a beautiful, messy, wonderful duet. Have you ever completely misjudged someone, only to find out they were exactly what you needed? Let me know your own stories of unexpected connections in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing for more tales of love found in the most unlikely of places.